It's like, where's that DJ lady anyway? Can't you just meet us there? Hi everyone, I'm Chanel J. Wilson, multidisciplinary artist and author. I am going to do a movie series where I do reviews and commentary on some of my favorite movies. So this is my Last Dragon appreciation movie review. In this review, I will be covering everything in 6 segments. In segment 1, I'm going to just give an overview, like a little introduction on why I decided to do this one. In episode 2, I'm going to cover the music and the soundtrack. In episode 3, I'm going to go over the color palette and wardrobe. In episode 4, I'm going to go over the characters and their character arcs. And in episode 5, I am going to cover, let me flip over my page, the action and cinematography, and then in episode 6, I'm going to go over the complete overall gist of what we can pull from the movie magic of The Last Dragon. So let's get started, shall we? Chinese Gojo is my secret, I bear no arm. May God help me if I ever have to use my art. Conscience is our guide, peace is our shelter, beauty and perfection is our life. See the courtesy. So, The Last Dragon is now on HBO Max, and my son and I like to, on the weekends or even during the week, we like to pick a movie and watch it. Sometimes I let him pick something, and then sometimes I like to pick something from my Rolodex of movies that I love and let him witness it. A couple of weeks ago we went over The Goonies and he loved it. Sloth is now his favorite character, and this time I decided to introduce him to The Last Dragon because he's at that age where he loves any kind of movie where you're getting the bad guy, any kind of action flick, any kind of flick where there's a cop and a robber and you got to get the bad guy. That's his thing. So as soon as the first scene came up, he was like, what is this, Mom? And I could see in his eyes the exact same inspiration, imagination, evolution, innovation pop all up in his face the way it did for me when I saw this movie back in 1985. I was about probably 4 turning 5, and then I watched the movie throughout the years with my friends, family members. So this movie has been a part of my life and a part of my artistic life for a very long time. Overall, when it comes to The Last Dragon, it's one of my favorites, and the reason why it's one of my favorites is because it's pop culture. It shows 1980 in all of its glory because it's 1985, and in the beginning of the 80s things were still trying to take a turn into the fashion world and still taking a turn on the things they liked. There was the disco era. Things still had that 70s feel. But once you get to 1985, 1980 kind of just burst out in a way that you don't see it in the beginning of the 80s. And you got a lot of Technicolor. You have a lot of designs, avant-garde, pop type, Andy Warhol type things. Just all types of innovative, risque, bold color, and not the kind of color that you're used to seeing in the 90s, but more so it's a different type of color. It's Technicolor, so it's a faded color, but it's still a color nonetheless. Wild hair. The mohawk was always the inspiration for almost every look, and then when you take that mohawk, you would see various variations of it. The punk scene was there, disco was still kind of there, R&B was there, funk. You heard a lot of synthesizers in the music, big synthesizer sounds. So what I enjoyed about this particular movie is that it takes action, it takes a hero's journey story, and then there's just laced with all this beautiful music to help with the story. This movie is actually called Berry Gordy's The Last Dragon, and Berry Gordy, who we know is was over Motown. He created Motown and that entire Motown sound, Hitsville, where he basically set an entire standard of American music with many artists. When I think about Motown, I think about, of course, the Supremes, Jackson 5, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, the Temptations. And then when you move on into more other generations of the Motown, I think about Tina Marie, I think about Rick James, I think about all those people that were around that, DeBarge, I think about the artists that were a part of Motown. Even when in my generation in the 90s, I think about The Boys. For those who don't know who The Boys are, go look them up online. They sing the song, "You Got Me Going Crazy." So I think about what Motown was and the artisan repertoire type production they put with all the artists. It wasn't just, we're gonna get you together and throw you together and put you out there. It was an entire standard. It was an elegance. The default was, we are gonna present excellence in everything we do. So we're gonna give you a full production, not just vocalists and singing, but there's gonna be a look, and there's gonna be some dance movements, and there'll be other things. When I think about Diana Ross and the Supremes, I think about when they, went to Europe and these different places, and how she spoke about how there was these elocution classes and all these things to prepare them for the work that they were going to do. So Motown represents something in our American history that is something that we should definitely pay attention to. And during this time in the 80s, Motown was trying to get into the film business in a broader way. What I enjoy about The Last Dragon also is the action aspects of this movie. In the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of kung fu movies with Bruce Lee. And of course, when Bruce Lee died, there was a void there. And a lot of people, all sorts of people, loved his artistry. Martial arts is both a physical defense tool and discipline, but it's also it's considered an art. And so when you watch some of Bruce Lee's original films and just watch him in the flow of his, and all the different, movements, and he's looking at the character and he's doing, the nunchucks and the various tools, and notice that I'm saying this from a place of respect, not in a place of appropriating or making fun. There's a beauty in watching Bruce Lee in his form. I see it in Jackie Chan also, in some of the movies that Jackie Chan has done, and Jackie Chan came out of Bruce Lee's camp from the different trainings and the various art forms of that craft. So there was this entire scene of kung fu flicks, and The Last Dragon, coming out in the 80s, when some things were kind of dying down with the kung fu flicks, well, just from that particular genre, we had what was called the blaxploitation genre, or mixing African American and blaxploitation with the kung fu scene. This movie, even though it was picked up, and at face value you may see it and think, oh, this is from a blaxploitation place, but it does not come off as a blaxploitation film at all. And overall, what I like about this particular movie is the flow of the lines, the various scenes. There's so many different scenes. When somebody says, don't cause a scene, or you hear someone in certain settings and they're like, oh my gosh, you came in and caused a scene, and the whole world just looked at her. That's what this movie does. Every scene that is set up, there is something to look at, there is something to explore, and there is something to experience. You don't just watch this film, you experience this film, even with the flow of lines. It can be seen as controversial because we do have what's called cultural appropriations in our life. And also, we do see people doing like performative blackness, or even, performative Asian culture. We don't want to make fun. In this particular movie, you do see certain things switch. With the main character, our protagonist, Leroy Green, who is also known as Bruce Leroy, you see him in a different type of demeanor. And that doesn't mean he's black, because being black is not a monolith. But back then, in the 80s, it was very rare to see a main African American character operate from this type of discipline or this type of place. And so you can tell that from his experience of training and learning the martial arts, it changed the way he approached life. And one of the I was doing a lot of research on this before I decided to do this. One of the commentaries was saying he spoke without using contractions. So instead of saying can't, he would say cannot, or won't, he would say will not. You should not, what was that line? I do not recommend that you do this, when he was stopping one of the guys from kidnapping one of the main characters. So he's a very interesting character. Now, the actor Time Mock, this was actually his first movie role. So some critics did say, you know, because he's a martial artist, you got all that beauty of his martial art. But on the acting side, they were trying to say that maybe it wasn't the best, but I feel that when I watched it, I feel that it added to the character of Bruce. Well, his name is Leroy Green, but then his nickname is Bruce Leroy. So it adds to his, I feel like it added to his character, both the innocence, the naivete, and the fact that he studied this art form for so long that it just basically transformed his whole life. And so in this Facebook group, what I was realizing is I found my community, I found my tribe, and this movie is a cult classic. So it falls right there with the Goonies, with the movie Clue, Back to the Future. What is it? I think Big Trouble in Little China. I might be saying it right. I gotta look at the correct title of it. But all these cult classic type films, Rocky Horror Picture Show, just movies that came out in a time, and it creates an entire world of people who admire the art, who are able to cosplay in the art, who are able to watch it and take something for their own life, and it blesses them and allows them to just it inspires them. Anytime I watch this movie, I am greatly inspired and greatly empowered. And one of the big deals for me, I'm 41. I recently had an injury, and I'm noticing when I am doing physical therapy, some of those moments feel really whack, and like I just feel very weak, and I have to rely on either affirmations or things to just keep me going in those moments. And I noticed this particular movie, now watching it at 41 after having my leg injury, I was finding myself saying, you know, conscious is our guide, peace is our shelter, beauty and perfection is our life. I had to keep speaking certain things to get me to just stay focused in the physical therapy and getting through it. So that was one of the big things about this movie that I really, really, really liked. Another thing we were talking about in our Facebook group was fantasy cast, and I'm kind of from the vein of I don't like reboots because we're trying to recapture the magic of what we had in the original. And I watched one video where there was a reunion, and a lot of people in the audience was like, they were like, do you want a reboot or do you want a sequel? And everybody was like, we would rather a sequel. We would not like a reboot, because sometimes you do feel like a reboot can be a cheap imitation of what you already had. When I watched it again and studied some of the characters and looked at the characters, I started having a moment of thinking, okay, who would my fantasy cast be? So at the end of this series, I will announce who I think a good fantasy cast would be. Once again, I still stick from the same vein of I don't think we should do a reboot, because I think this movie is really beautiful as a one-off. Even in a sequel, I still feel like, you know, most of the people who were in the movie, a lot of people have passed on. So you can rewrite a story and say maybe they passed on or they died or they moved away or something like that. But I think that something will be lost because we're not revisiting the same characters. We want to see the love story between Laura Charles and Leroy and what that produced. I mean, if they did do a sequel, they could say, okay, you know, she's passed on, and they do this big thing, and then they show his son. Some people were saying there's a couple of actors who could play the role of his son or something like that. There's many ways you could go with that. You could be very creative. But then there are some things that are lost because the movie was made in 1985. Now, our music scene, pop culture scene is very interesting now in this time. I'm not saying that we couldn't do something really cool, but I just feel that Dick Clark, that American Bandstand of the 80s and what it was, we don't have video DJs now. So we would have to reflect on, okay, YouTube. It would be a YouTube type of thing instead. So there's many reasons why I would resist a reboot, but if we could rely on that creative vein, I think that would probably be the best way to approach a sequel, especially it being so many years later. One of the key things for me is I still remember it. My mom and I would go to the local video store in Hayward, California. That's where I grew up. I was a young dancer. I was dancing since I was 3 to 13. So as soon as I saw this movie for the first time, I was always like, when is the VHS coming out? When can we go see it? And usually for us, VHSs came out a year or 2 years after the movie. So I remember us going to our local mom and pop video store, and there would be one side would be the VHSs, the other side would be the Beta. We had Beta, so we would either get whatever was available. We would grab the tape, because that's what it was a tape. We go up and buy it, and it was a one aisle movie store. And I just remember the feeling I would always have, because it would always be a Friday after school, so I knew the whole weekend I'm going to watch this tape out until we had to bring it back. And most of those stores, you had to take it back the next day, so we would tell them we're going to pay for 2 days because I love this movie so much. And I would just spend the entire weekend watching the movie, doing the dances, acting like I was Lord Charles and all those scenes. And my mom would work with me, and I would act like I'm signing autographs. And then when the fight scenes, I turned into Bruce Leroy because I wanted to do some karate chops and kicks. And then I'd recite all the lines like, "Where's that DJ lady anyway? Can't you just meet us there?" You know, just various little things. Shout outs to Face Prince, Angela Baracco. I love that character so much. I love her so much. So for me, there's just an excitement about the entire movie, and then the entire story. It's a simple hero's journey overall, and it just takes us from one element to the next. But the way they deliver this movie, it's just brilliant. And I talk more about that in the other segments. I don't want to pull too much from the segment, so I'll wrap up episode 1 with this. Throughout the years, I would revisit this movie and just have a full-blown nostalgic joy of witnessing art. Breathtaking art. Art about black people and other races and other cultures blending together and creating not only this scene, but this whirlwind of imagination, of determination, and finding this glow. You know, the special effects in the end of the movie, it's like, and I know now when we look at it, we're like, oh my god, what was this? But back then, that's what we had, and it was like, whoa. I remember watching the movie with some of my guy cousins, and the scene, you know, when the glow comes, we're all just like, oh, this is cool. And then when he catches the bullet with his teeth, we're like, oh, that really happened. You know, it's just a breathtaking situation. It's beautiful cinematic movements about a young black protagonist's hero's journey of searching for the mystery of the glow in the final layer. I see the movie very differently now, and I say that as a 41-year-old woman. I say that as a woman and as a young girl who studied film. I studied film, cinematography, and film editing at Academy of Art College in the early 2000s. I was a theater major in the late 90s at SFSU. So I'm truly one of those theater geeks, or theater blurs, however you want to call it. So this is so up my alley. But as I watched it now as a 41-year-old woman who's really looking into exploring more of her independent filmmaker side, I saw things that I did not see before. And so that's why I wanted to do this series, so that I could really just pull out some of these fine points and these key points. So stay tuned for the next couple of topics. I cannot just cover this in one episode, like I said before. So come on this hero's journey with me. And yes, there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen this movie before, I recommend that you stop right now, go on HBO Max and watch it, or go order it on Amazon. It's up there. You can rent it on the Prime on demand. And, you know, let's just dig deep into Berry Gordy's The Last Dragon.